Hello. I'm live and I'm too bright. I'm fixing that. I can fix this. Hello, Jeff, my brother. Nice to have you here. And anybody else who joins. Hello, hello. I'm Jeremy Sherman, in case that isn't obvious. Let's see. I'm just fixing the lights a little bit here. There we go. Gotta look my best, you know? Well, nice to have. Oh, look, there's a few people here. Nice to have you here, everybody. This I, I rarely deal directly with the theme that I give to my weekly thing. That is, I have to come up with a theme each time, and I'm just sorting out my beard here, trying to get it in the right direction. Um, but this time, I want to start with it. And so I realized the other day that I've been bullshitting myself about something uh, pretty typical. I've been encouraging people to get curious, and I don't normally subscribe to what I consider to be a kind of robo envy, where I simply say, just reprogram yourself to be this certain way. Just from now on the count of three, be different. Because it doesn't actually address motivations. I'm trying to get my angle right, I don't cause vertigo. There we go. I've got it now. All right. So, telling people just be curious. It's like, well, okay. Like, who does that? No one just responds that way. If you say, you know what you should do, you should do this. That's not how people are. We have to address the motivation side of things. And I realized that my situation is peculiar, special, lucky from my perspective at least, because my curiosity is not because I decided to become curious, because curious is a good thing. That's not what happened to me. Um, Rather, I got curious because I found some promising hunches to play with, things that hadn't been tried very much. And I think that that's true in all the realms in which I play, which includes everything from origins of life to a full understanding of evolution, which is not just natural selection from my perspective. Um, and I got some hunches about how to go about that one, but also the psychoproctology work I do, things that hadn't been tried that I thought had some promise. Happy Saturday, Shirley. Nice to have you here. And everybody, nice to have any of you here. It's great. I love it. Um, so, so because I've got those promising directions to go, that's what motivated my curiosity. And I think I can begin to lay out how we end up going through various phases that could end up leading to the state I feel lucky to be in. And again, I just have to caveat everything I say. For all I know, I'm barking up the wrong tree. You cannot play in science without the potential that you will spend your entire life barking up the wrong tree. It's certainly possible. I don't see why I'd be an exception. But so I'm not speaking about whether it is universally good. I'm just saying about this is how I ended up becoming the kind of guy I am, and it's a route that I don't think is that common. And so I want to be a little explicit about what got me here. Um, I'll talk about it as a sequence, and it may be kind of familiar to you. So suppose you get the bug, you get hooked on the thought that you actually might be able to think about things at a big picture level. So you so you this would often happen by reading a book that makes you feel like a genius. It's kind of exciting. So for me, an early one was Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. Um, I had other beliefs before I got into this, and I'd already always had a respect for evolutionary theory. But there were a few books I read. That one, and a book by a woman named Connie Barlow, who I ended up meeting and becoming friends with. But it was just an anthology of writing in biophilosophy, and I was excited. I was excited by the possibility that I would be able to understand this stuff. It had also happened at a time when the beliefs I was operating on, which were basically those kind of new age, they were pre-new age, I have to claim, just because I have to restore my dignity some. But it was the hippie versions of things. which also made me feel like a genius. I had been on a commune. I had lived a serious commune. This was not just one of those fly by night. This was the largest commune in the United States. It was 1,400 people. Um, I had really thrown myself into that life. It was steady and sturdy. It was called the Farm in Summertown, Tennessee. There are still 350 people there. There were 1,400 when I was there, um, and so I had a whole set of beliefs that weren't working anymore. And I thought, well, this isn't working for me anymore. The Buddhist kind of accommodate everyone, be kind to everyone, and everything will work out kind of thing that I had believed as a pacifist hippie. Um, that dog wasn't hunting. I started to realize it's not. This isn't life size. This isn't going to get me through my life. It was already causing me trouble because one of the things you find among that culture, like the Trump culture, like any culture, is you start to get kind of smug about it, like you've solved reality. And and I was beginning to see that it wasn't actually solving things. And I had a bunch of friends, um, and who were using it in ways that I found tricky, and I wasn't going to just use them back. I thought that's kind of slippery, and that's the problem with any ideology from my perspective is that as soon as you start associating it with good, like you're one of the good guys for having it, it becomes easy cover for being a bad person. So I was beginning to realize this isn't working for me. It's not enough, and part of this was because I was in a midlife crisis, and it wasn't enough to get me through. One of the things that was telling me to just breathe and be calm and accept everything and all that sort of stuff. And no, I wasn't able to breathe. I wasn't able to stay calm. I was crying every day. I was a mess. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to swap out that ideology for another ideology. And then I thought, wait a second, no, I don't want to do that. In part because I didn't see any others that were going to be a better move for me. I'm just adjusting myself here again. Um, let's see if I can do this. This is a little tricky. Oh, that's better. There we go. I love the technology when it works. So there was a moment, a good inflection point, one that I'm grateful for, whether it was true or not, but it's this one where I got interested in how do we shop among interpretations? How do living beings shop among interpretations? And how can I get as real as possible about what I am? Enough with the ideology. I don't want to have an ideology that doesn't hold up. I actually need one that lasts my lifetime. And I don't want it to be just an ideology that has pat answers. I actually thought that if I really wanted to live well by my standards, I'd have to figure out what the actual fuck I am. So around that time, I'm reading Dawkins and all these guys on natural selection, and I got into evolutionary psychology, and then I started to see that it too was being abused in interesting ways. And then I got interested in complexity theory, and around that time, I met Terry Deacon, this guy who is a Harvard neuroscientist, biological anthropologist at Harvard at the time I met him. And we've been working together ever since, right up to 15 minutes ago when I just got back from a walk with him. He is moving out of town. This is a big transition for me. He's moving 6 hours away um, at his wife's request, and I am going to have to figure out how to stay connected to this because I'm thoroughly addicted to what I get from my conversations with him. Because he had a curiosity that was, well, first of all, more encyclopedic than mine. He was a real scientist. Um, and he was very accessible, which is also rare among scientists. And um, and I caught the bug from him about his approach to figuring out what the actual fuck we are. And I remember, for example, a conversation with him. He's got a very receptive style. I would say sometimes too receptive, but he was very inviting, even of my half-witted ideas. For example, at the time, I was thinking natural selection explains it all. Richard Dawkins has solved reality. Um, Evolutionary theory had solved reality. There was still that temptation in me. So I felt like a genius for reading his book. And this is it's a direct quote from the New York Times um, about the selfish gene. Makes every reader feel like a genius. So I was opening up. My curiosity was opened up by this feeling that I could be like a genius, and then I entered into a phase that is interesting to me in general. I am actually trying to generalize beyond my own my own autobiography here. Um, there's a place where you get the hooked on the possibility that you could actually understand think about big picture ideas, and then there's an expansion to where you start to study all of the different approaches. So if you're someone who got interested in consciousness studies, you have a lot to choose from these days. The recent survey of 350 different theories about consciousness, and you can really get into it. And here you got a few moves. One is you just stay there. In fact, if you decided, as I did, to go to get a degree in my case, it was a cross between evolutionary biology and decision theory. So it was what we call evolutionary epistemology, trying to understand. It's basically philosophy of knowledge under the assumption that we are living creatures from a long line of living creatures. So what do we mean by knowledge in an animal that doesn't have words, doesn't come up with theories? What do we mean by knowledge in a plant or a single cell organism? They don't have feelings, they don't have thoughts, but they still have a kind of know-how. And that know-how would be there from the beginning. So I decided I was going to get a PhD in evolutionary epistemology. I started hanging out with Terry, and one of the things that they do in PhD programs is they want you to know all the different theories out there. So you become this avid, enthusiastic shopper who can name all of the different theories out there and summarize them and play with them. So you're kind of like a kid in the candy shop at that point. It's lots of fun. And you start hanging out with people who also know those theories, and you shop talk them, and you feel a little peer pressure because if someone knows a theory you don't know, then you want to learn about that theory so you don't feel punked when you're in conversation with them and all of that. A lot of people land there and stay there in that expansive approach. For example, if you're going to become a professor of biophilosophy, any of the things, consciousness studies, cognitive psychology, any of these things, you can become someone who just knows the field, knows the range, and you might even write books, textbooks, for example, where you just got to lay out all the different theories and let people shop among them. Another thing that can happen to you when you're in that is that you find a theory you like. And you like it because you can identify with it. It's a theory that you can relate to, but also that you can relate to other people. And it becomes your kind of identity, that you represent this certain approach. And you also find this throughout the academic world. You got all these people who are pitching their theory, maybe one they've come up with, maybe one they got from their PhD advisors or whatever. And your job, it's actually your technical job, is to champion that theory. You don't even have to believe the theory anymore. But one version of what's going on is that it's a trial and error process, and you are just to represent one of the trials in it. So I don't necessarily believe my theory anymore, they might say, but I am the guy who represents it. It's my name is associated with, so I continue to champion it all the way to the end of my days as an academic. You don't tend to see a whole lot of changes in someone's approach. Immanuel Kant, Wittgenstein, they both actually changed their mind at one point in the middle of their careers. But that's relatively rare. Mostly what you do is, so these are people who got the bug, they started to feel like geniuses, and then they got expansive and shopped among a bunch of theories, and then they landed on one that they could represent, and then they represent that out. There's a problem with both of those approaches. It's one of the reasons why though I have such great respect for philosophical questions, I'm not that excited about a lot of what goes on in philosophy and in biophilosophy, because at some point I realized that there was a problem with how we were doing it, which is that we really didn't have a standard for deciding which theory was more realistic than which. There are two main standards by which scientists, or the scientific method, figures out which theory is better than which. One is a theory has to be coherent. You can't be talking out both sides of your mouth. It's got to be formally coherent. That is, you don't want to be saying opposite things. or you do, but you got to resist that temptation because it discredits your theory. It's called the law of the fallacy of explosion, which is if there's an inconsistency in your theory, then basically you can prove anything with it because it violates true versus false, something like that. So that's the formal side of it. And we've been doing that ever since Pythagoras, you could say. Math or logic are attempts to be internally coherent. But the problem with internal coherency by itself is that it doesn't have any traction in the real world. For example, I could declare that everything in the universe is made of green cheese. That's a absolutely coherent theory, but it's got no correspondence to reality. So the second way that scientists do this work is that what we consider the scientific revolution is the decision that you have to actually tie theory to empiricism and do it rigorously, which means you have to find evidence in support of or against one or another theory. So that's, you could say it's like road testing or stress testing in the real world, your coherent theory. So you got coherence, which means that you're not talking out both sides of your mouth, and then you got correspondence, which is that whatever you're saying has direct correspondence. Well, there's a problem with that when you get to the big picture issues, which is that it's easy to come up with coherent theories, and you'll find some evidence for your theory. Any of the consciousness studies could find some evidence of support in support of them, and you can also find evidence in against other theories. But the problem is you still don't know. Still don't have a standard for knowing which theory is better than which, because they're all kind of coherent. And they all have some empirical, tack welding onto the real world, something like that. What I got interested in with Terry and why I have hunches that keep me curious is that Terry was saying there's another aspect to this, which is how do you even come up with your generalizations? This is an old question in philosophy. The way it was framed in the Middle Ages is if Socrates is in Greece and Plato's in Paris, where is man? Man is this category. Okay, so it's a generalization or called a universal. How do you come up with your categories? Well, humans are good at coming up with categories. We're pathologically good at it. I can posit anything. I can posit God. And it really simplifies things. We talk about Occam's razor, which is your theory should be as simple as possible. That is, if you have two theories, one of them, both of which explain the same empirical evidence, but one is simpler than the other, pick the simpler one. There's a problem with that. These days, I'm calling it Occam's black box. So a black box in engineering is something you don't know how it functions, but you know what it does. You know its function. You drop something into the black box, something comes out of it. It's like a recipe or an algorithm. So God is kind of a black box. And if you want a simple theory, just go with God. I mean, it explains everything. And of course, there's a problem with explaining everything, which is anything that explains everything explains nothing because it's not really testable, is what we call non-falsifiable. I hope this is interesting to you, and I'm going to keep going just for a little bit more on this because it's about why I'm curious. And I'll drop it right into the psychoproctology for anybody who's paying attention to that side of things more. I'll explain how this relates. So without a standard for figuring out how to categorize, anybody can come up with any kind of category and simply say, well, there's this thing in the universe. And it could be God or a higher power. I do not make a distinction between religion and spirituality because they both assume there's some motivated appetite in the universe, that the universe itself or something above it wants something. And I had dropped out of that. I had decided, no, that I'm not going to take that route. I didn't want that kind of approach. I wanted to do what science does, which is science pursues natural explanations for all natural phenomena. And I couldn't help but notice that some things are trying and other things are not. Some forces are trying and other things are not. My motivation is trying to do things, but Um, Fire isn't trying to do anything. So I wasn't going to say, well, there's something that's trying at the start of everything. And so mattering comes first. Something matters to some entity, and matter comes later. It creates matter and energy. No, I wasn't going to do that. I was going to say, I got to start with matter and energy, and I got to explain how you'd ever get things that are trying. Things like Jeff Cheney, who is trying. I would say that Jeff is succeeding. I don't know if he knows that he's succeeding, but I think he is. But one thing I can certainly say, and I think he'd agree with me on this, is that Jeff is trying, whereas my cell phone is not trying. It's not trying to do anything. I will draw a parallel here to what goes on in religion because I see the same thing I just described go on in religion or spirituality. So imagine you're a guy who just deals with your everyday life and you're living a normal life, and suddenly you go to church one day and you start to feel like a genius or a saint or both because you suddenly have a big picture curiosity and you find that you can actually handle it, that the sermon you're hearing or the spiritual teaching from the guru makes some sense to you, kind of resonates. And maybe you become kind of a theologian who studies all the different theories. You become a kid in the candy shop for all the different spiritual theories. And maybe you mix and match them. And maybe you land on one that you're going to promote to the world because it feels good to you and it feels good to be promoting it. I mean, it's quite a delight to be a preacher, if you can find that word. Nice work if you can get it. It's fun to be a preacher. I am a preacher, by the way, in case you haven't noticed. I had an interesting conversation with the daughter of an important teacher of mine, a guy named Gregory Bateson, where she scoffed at me for preaching. I find her incredibly preachy. And I said, no, I am a preacher. I am a preacher. I am not preaching a particular doctrine so much as curiosity. It's an interesting place to be so dogmatic about not being dogmatic. But there are plenty of people who just say, you're a preacher. And okay, I am. I love it. I say what I need to hear, and I say it to anybody who will listen to me because it's satisfying. It's definitely one of my confidence currencies. So you notice what I did was I just drew a parallel between what goes on in science and what goes on in religion. And that's the problem. There's a problem with both of them because they both, you get really excited. You feel like you're a genius or a saint or someone who's solved reality. And then you get open-minded and you explore the different theories. And then you come up with the theory that you like, or you just become someone who can explain all the different theories and feels good because they know them all and doesn't have to worry about peer pressure where someone's going to punk you by having a theory that you don't know about. And I deal with this a lot in the comments section, but also with my academic buddies. The range of ideas out there. This is the problem with philosophy, whether it be religious, spiritual, or straight up scientific philosophy, is that you can think a lot out there. So what I got with Terry was a few things that in a way I want to pass on in these sessions. The dude was right there. You could talk to him. He's a human being. He wasn't pulling rank on me. He wasn't on his high horse. He wasn't going to teach me how to solve reality. The guy was peculiarly curious. I mean, when we get together and talk, he is right there wondering about the next moves we want to make. At the same time, he also had come up with a standard that makes completely intuitive sense to me, and I think makes a kind of realistic sense, which has to do with this thing about generals or universals. Like, where is man? How do you even come up with these generals, the categories? Because you can come up with a coherent theory and you can find some tack welding onto reality. You can find some evidence to support your theory. The religious people can do this too. Anybody can. And find reasons why the other theories are wrong and all that. And it becomes, flavor of the month, fad of the month. This is what's going on in consciousness studies. Things rise and fall. It's more like art, more like poetry. And poetry is kind of the point here. I love poetry. I write poetry a lot for fun. It's mostly doggerel. But it's not the same as what I'm trying to do with the science, or at least you say, I want my poetry to be driven by my science. I don't want my science to be driven by my poetry. But there is something about working with categories of things, universals, generals, that people get into where they don't have to explain They're explanations. They have unexplained explanations. So a big one right now in science is information. We talk about it like it's the stuff that's everywhere, but it's also this stuff that's um, in special places. Like there's information in molecules. Certain molecules have information in them. DNA is an information-bearing molecule. What the fuck is information? Well, you just kind of assume it. It's an unexplained explanation. So, what is life according to Richard Dawkins and the people who I studied early on, the people I was infatuated with? Well, it's replicating information. It's just information that gets passed on until you're nothing but replicating information. What is information? Well, there are two approaches to that, but they don't. There's a gap between them. So what I'm saying is, if we don't get clear on what these categories are, we can make up all sorts of refrigerator magnet poetry out of them. We can simply make up models that employ these unassumed assumptions. And that's no different from saying, well, God is everywhere. God is in some things. It's in living things. God pours into here. It's kind of everywhere, somewhere, but it's also kind of nowhere. Information especially. Because what is it when you use an unexplained explanation? You're basically engaging in dualism. There's the natural world, and then on top of that, or elsewhere, or somewhere in a different realm, different dimension, there's the spiritual realm or the information realm. So scientists are trying to stick with just the physical world, but they end up employing these ideas that are kind of they're crypto dualism. And they're even celebrated. I mean, they're celebrated and avoided. We have a very weird relationship with this idea of dualism. And by the way, everything I'm saying has application to, let's say, Donald Trump. That is, he's always pulling out his ass some dualistic moral principle that he will employ everywhere and nowhere and somewhere. It's something that humans do. One of the challenges we're dealing with, if we're trying to figure out what the actual fuck we are, is that we are living in two worlds, the world and the world of our words. And words are what I'm talking about. You can come up with words for anything. I can make up a black box explanation for anything. Anybody can. We can come up with them. We can give them fancy names. We can give them spiritual names. I can call, let's take the concept of motivation. What is a motivation? Well, I can say, well, it's just physical work, or it's something added to physical work from where, I don't know, to some other thing. So it's kind of everywhere. I'm nothing. I don't really have motivations, would say a determinist like Robert Sapolsky. I have behavior, but it's just physical cause and effect, push and pulls, that kind of thing. So motivation is another example of a word like information in that it's an unexplained explanation. And I think I've described this recently to you. I had a chance to have a conversation with the chief scientist for the American Psychology Association who had gotten into research in psychology because he was interested in the free will versus determinism question. And I asked him, so what'd you find out? I mean, this guy's pretty far along. He says, no, we're determined. There is no other realm. You are just matter in motion, which doesn't make the distinction between me and this. This isn't trying. It's matter in motion, but it's not trying an I am. So motivation is another example of one of these words. And I can use it. If I ask a scientist, I asked him what motivation was. He said, well, if you see effort, then you assume motivation. Well, how is that different from saying when you see effort, you assume soul or spirit or will? It's not really different. Naming is not explaining. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I got from Terry, is that he said, let's eliminate those words until we have to be able to demonstrate how this phenomena comes about. How is it that out of matter in motion, you would ever get motivation or information? So let me take information for an example just right here. By the way, as always, I could go on ad nauseum, but if you've had ideas this week, including things that are completely unrelated to what I've said here so far, please post them in the comments. Let's play with your ideas. Enough of Jeremy's ideas. But a little bit more of Jeremy's ideas while I wait for you to come up with some notions that have come up this week. One of the things I'm inviting you to do is to, when you have an idea during the week, grab it. You only get 30 seconds. I mean, I'm nearly 70, and so I really probably only get 29 or 28 seconds before I forget it. I forgot one this week. I didn't write it down fast enough. I'd like to get that one back. But to capture them and to play with them, that would be a symptom of curiosity. Here I'm mostly talking about the motivation to get curious. Okay, motivation is really important to information. So let me just explain that. So there's this assumption out there that it's just completely intuitive that information is some stuff out there and it tells us things. It's even got a name in semiotic theory. It's called sign action. It's bullshit. Like if I see a stop sign, the stop sign itself, this material thing, is trying to tell me something. It's doing the work. It's the business end of it. I'm just a receptor of it. That's the idea behind signed action. Nah, it's not how it works. Anything can become information. It's only information for some being motivated to do something. That is, nothing would be information to Jeff Cheney if he wasn't trying to do things. Nothing is information to my phone. Nothing is information to AI. AI is not trying to do anything. I can take a bunch of information that has been processed by human beings, basically fossils of human information processing, or in the key word here is interpretation. I have to, if I want to start using the word information, I have to actually be clear on the fact that I'm the business end of it, because I'm the one who's actively interpreting stuff. It's not trying to tell me anything. Someone who planted that stop sign is trying to tell me something. But the reason I'm responding to it is I don't want to die in traffic, so that's why I stop at the stop sign, or at least roll through. I'm not the best driver. I have a son who's who's an auto mechanic, and he staged an intervention with me the other day. He said, "Dad, you're not a car person," and he also, I have yet to drive my grandkids anywhere because I don't think they think I'm a safe enough driver. So be that as it may, I was talking about information. Anything can become information. It's only information when it's about something for someone trying to do something, like stay alive. So for me, you end up with these academic fields or topics, which I think are really badly named. Information theory assumes that there's this shit called information. Semiotic theory, the theory of signs, assumes that there's signs. What are we really talking about? I had to coin a term for it, and it's an obvious term: hermenology. Hermeneutics is the pursuit of best interpretations. Hermenology would be the pursuit of better explanations for the emergence and nature of interpretation. Herman somehow means interpretation. I don't know the roots of that. So as a result, I'm trying to focus on the business end of it, because nothing is information unless there's someone who's trying to interpret it. So big difference between cause and effect, physical pushes and pulls between molecules, for example, and interpretation, which is always means to an end. So a stop sign doesn't cause me to stop unless I crash into it. Rather, I interpret it as about traffic for my pursuit of not dying in traffic. And that's true across the board. So with Terry, I ended up getting these hunches and bunches that yielded, that got me on what I call a word-wise spiral, which is I needed better language. I needed to be more rigorous and careful in my language to deal with the ideas I was beginning to play with. And as a result, I cultivated language that enables me to think things up a notch. I get to keep on thinking things up a notch. I mean, Terry has been he's the love of my life. And I got to date some attractive women, but no, he's the love of my life by hands down, just no contest. because he keeps the curiosity spinning. So, for example, this morning, me, him, and this other buddy of ours who he just got 2 PhDs. He already had a law degree from Canada. Very basic, sweetheart of a guy, no pretense in him. And we're talking through the evolution of venom. So I'm going to tie this into psychoproctology, and this is brand new for me. So I'm not going to be very articulate about it, but we're talking about how a kind of molecule can become you can overdose on it internally. So you figure out ways to you evolve ways to sequester it. And then once it's sequestered, you can actually start to use it as venom to attack others because you've got a way to protect yourself against it. So he's drawing parallels for this all the way down to pre-LUCA, that is before the last universal common ancestor. Before that, you've got FUCA, the first universal common ancestor, which is an organism that has got, it already has the whole DNA, RNA sequence, an incredibly complicated system. And now he's going pre-FUCA to try to figure out how you'd ever end up with polypeptides, which are these molecules that have that have energy, phosphate and oxygen, that are dangerous in overdose. And so he's working out that part. He's working out the whole catastrophe where life nearly ended because there was so much oxygen in the environment. And then we ended up evolving ways, not figuring out. It's not figuring out. We ended up evolving ways to use oxygen. He's working that part out. He takes it all the way out to a speculation about how life somewhere might evolve a capacity to basically have an internal nuclear reactor, what I call radiogens. But he's trying to figure out how this happens. And in the meantime, I'm going all the way out to Donald Trump. How do you take a toxin, protect yourself against it, and then use that toxin on others to give you advantage? There is a connection I'm playing with. I want to be really careful about it, but there's a connection I'm playing with between stuff that explains the evolution of nucleotides and the evolution of assholes in humans. I mean, human assholes, absolutists is what I mean. That's fun. And I have to be careful with it. So early on in this work, I realized that I was cultivating 3 skills. One I call pattern fluency, which is, well, actually, I'll start with another one. Pattern sensuality. You love to lick the contours of patterns. You're thinking about not just individual things, but you're thinking about habits of interpretation, you could say. The patterns that we deal with. The intellectual sparks of others can bring one to interesting pathways. Yes, that's what I'm talking about, Shirley. That's right. And I'm also talking about a challenge to the joy of interesting pathways. There are a lot of interesting pathways. I mean, if you want to think outside the box or think big picture, there's a lot out there. So pattern fluency is the spark that I got from a variety of sources that got me interested in solving for patterns. So this pattern sensuality is what I'm talking about there. And the goal for me is to cultivate pattern fluency, but you also need pattern discernment. And this has to do with this thing about interesting pathways. There are a lot of interesting pathways. Some are really exciting. Some are a little more work. And I have to be able to figure out which patterns are real and which ones are not. Not if I'm just looking for joy and contentment and happiness and the perfectly pleasurable fun of having speculations, doing show and tell, where you show up a party and someone mentions a key word that's interesting to you and you have something to say about it. That's very satisfying. But somehow I got sobered up, you could say bitch slapped by my midlife crisis into thinking, all right, I really would like to use my time here to figure out what the actual fuck we are, and to, or at least to speculate more carefully than the easy route. I'm trying to figure out what I actually am. And just a wonderful thing to do. You say that from the beginning of life, there's representation. An adaptation is a representation. Let me take an example of my hand. My hand is adaptive. Why? Well, because it happens to fit things. It's, you could say, this is the positive, this is the negative. They're related to each other that way. That's a kind of representation in the inverse that a hand is. And that's what an adaptation would be in general. Okay, so the habits or the patterns of thinking, all of those sorts of things. Um, I'm I'm trying to work all the way from the origins of habits, which would or start with Jeff Cheney. The origins of habits would start with trying. Um, Anything trying would have habits or adaptations, a kind of know-how that would enable them to succeed, to survive, all the way out to what goes on with humans. And in particular, since this was Terry's focus for a long time, and it's an incredibly rich vein that I play in all the time, is that we're a symbolic species. His first book was called The Symbolic Species, or it's called Symbolic Species. And it's about what happens when you gain the power of words, all the habits that come from having that medium to work in. And it's actually, if you know anything about Marshall McLuhan, it's this basically media ecology. That is, how do things change when you've got a new medium to work in? Like when you got AI, or when you got internet, or when you've got printing, or when you've got writing, or when you've got language, or when you have DNA. All of those are changes in media, and they also change what happens. So I think about Trumpists in terms of that. I do not think that an organism can become an asshole. There are no absolutist organisms. That's a human thing. And why? Because you need language to do that. With language, you can make a refrigerator imaginative poetry model that feels perfectly coherent, and you can find some ways to relate it to reality, and you can call it natural laws, which are all laws are worded. So trying to understand myself, not just as an organism who's trying, but trying while driving drunk under the influence of language, which makes us an incredibly visionary and delusional species. And delusional in the service of what? In the service of maintaining our confidence, the way that Trump does. On my way from the walk, I realized, so I think we're all sadomasochistic. With language, you end up with that, but I don't like that because it doesn't sound right, because it makes it sound binary. Either you are or you're not sadomasochistic. So I came up with sadonarsissist, narcissist. What do I mean by sadonarsissist? I can elevate myself, but I also put other people down, and both are ways for me to feel elevated. So I think there's some of that in all humans. We don't get to exercise it to the same degree. Trump has more freedom to be a sadomasochistic than I do, and than a poor guy in Guatemala does. But we have that tendency to reach out for something that makes us feel confident. So all of that is background. Yes. Okay. So does trauma encoding fit anywhere in your research? So one thing that fits really into my research is an incredible fuss about language. And encoding is a problem for me. So I understand there's all these technical terms, and they sound all precise, just like the word motivation sounds better than soul or spirit. But no, notice what you've got there in that term. So I will talk about trauma and how it fits in there. Yes, I will talk about that. But I want to talk about coding for a second. So the idea of sign action, I mentioned earlier, where the sign is doing the work. I'm not interpreting, the sign is trying to tell me something. That comes from a field, a topic, or you could say a school of thought in biophilosophy called code biology. Okay, what do we mean by a code? A code is a one-to-one correspondence. You translate it from this to this. So you just put an equal sign between them, okay? And code biology is saying everything is just codes. We talk about the genetic code. That actually doesn't give you anything like trying. There's no trying in there. In fact, it's a very mechanistic model of things. So I can translate from one computer language to another, but that's because there's a one-to-one correspondence, and it just translates across. Now, try this out. You got this rock. This is before life. There's a rock. They're sitting on a mountain, and it's stuck in clay, and it falls out of the clay, and it leaves a cavity, and then you say some mud falls into that cavity, and as a result, you end up basically translating from the rock to this mud that fell in there. You can think of the hole that was left by it as a template. It's a template. It's a mold. There was a rock in it that made the mold. Rock falls out, mud falls in, and it basically molded the mud. That's code talk, but there's a problem with it, right? Because there's no life. Nothing's trying to do anything. When we talk about codes, we're kind of talking in as if it's both meaningful, or it relates to trying, but also like it's just material. So anytime anybody says the brain is hardwired for this, I have trouble with it. That's not how brains work. It's an easy poetic way to talk about it, but no, it's not code. When I'm talking to you, there's no interpretation in code. You can set up a machine to translate from one thing to another. It's not interpreting. That's physical cause and effect. It's what you'd say that this molecule happens to have a shape that this molecule fits into. So that's kind of a code too, but it's not trying. Okay, now let me get to trauma. I'm taking a different approach these days to trauma in my practical work with clients. I have clients who come see me, including these days some younger people who've been through some traumatic experiences and they're dealing with the trauma. Now, my daughter, she works in the what is it called? I always get this name fixed. Shoot, this is terrible. This is embarrassing. It's that stuff. It's one of the more popular approaches to dealing with trauma, which is you neutralize. I find it interesting and fascinating, and I forget the acronym. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to my daughter for that. But I'm taking a different approach, which is strictly practical. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I see clients, but it's psychostrategic consulting. I'm saying whatever happened, is traumatic. And one thing you can do about it is make things better in your life, and it will tend to recede. So let me give you a trivial example of this. So I have a partner, and I don't, but I had a partner, and she dumps me, and she goes off with another guy. Well, I'm not likely to get over that mildly traumatic, though it feels incredibly traumatic to a guy like me. I was really sensitive to being dumped, in part because my partners always went off and found the next guy who was wonderful, at least for a time, like right away. But what I noticed was that I needed to be in quarantine for a while because I was no good in the dating world. But if I got back out into the dating world, it was interesting. If I went on a date that was terrible, the trauma would be revived in me. I remember coming back from one terrible date and begging my ex-partner to come back to me. But if you go out on a date with someone where it feels like it's a little promising, the trauma recedes some. And so this, it does relate to my research, but not in the traditional sense. And it can be. So let me make another parallel to it. I had a client last night who, this is a new thing. We've been working together for maybe 2 years. And lately he's been checking with AI, asking all the questions he's been dealing with in my research. And last night we spent 2 hours together, he wanted to read me through everything that AI said to him in response to his situation, a conflict he has to deal with. And it was very non-confrontational. It was basically the AI was suggesting that he take a non-confrontational approach. And yet this is a situation he's in for a long time, and he will be in for a long time, and it's not working for him. So it was a great session, and I'm very happy to do that. It's like he wanted a second opinion on AI's opinion. It was fabulous. We had a great time. And I tell him, AI and I are going to gang up on you because it said lots of things that I said, and of course it would. And I even feigned umbrage, like I don't ever want to see this again because it stole my thunder, all that sort of stuff. Just joking with him. But anyway, one of the things it seems to be avoiding is what we call the backfire effect. Backfire effect is that if you confront someone, they will push back. They will dig in their heels and push back. So you don't, the oversimplistic theory is don't ever push back. You'll cause trauma. The trauma will make people lock down. And as a result, you won't get anywhere. Well, as you can tell from if you watch any of my videos about psychopractology or you read any of this stuff I write, I'm saying you got three basic moves. You got accommodation. Don't confront, just accommodate. You've got space taking, it's boundary setting. And then you got assertion. And all of them have a place. I'm saying these days, actually, assertion is what we need to be doing more of with the Trumpists. We're too late at that because people were afraid of the backfire effect. My experience with the backfire effect, and this wouldn't be true for everybody, is that it feels traumatic when I am called on something, when someone calls me out and criticizes me and gives me negative feedback. It's like bitter. And I want to spit it out. And I say, no, you don't understand. That's not true. But some gets in anyway. So yeah, at first, people will dig in their heels. But invariably, at least in my experience, no, I wouldn't say invariably. But often, some gets in anyway. And you end up digesting it anyway. So you end up learning from it. The way I think of digestion is you're sorting out what's nutritious in the feedback and the criticism you got from what is waste product. And the more confidence I have in my gut to be able to do that, the more I can tolerate ingesting it. I don't have to react right away. I don't have to spit it out. My face will go molten when I get feedback because I don't know whether to shit or go blind. I don't know whether to turn a blind eye, just accept it, or throw a shit fit. But the more I trust my gut to interpret it by my standards, keeping my own counsel, the more I can ingest it, and I don't need it right away. So why does that relate to trauma encoding? Well, trauma it's a dramatic name. It's traumatic and dramatic for something that I think most of us will end up getting in our lives. I don't know if Trump will get it before he dies. I certainly hope he does, but I don't think he'll respond to it. I mean, backfire effect is his solution to everything. Confirmation bias, confidence bias, all that sort of stuff. But what we're talking about is something bad happens to you in your life and you didn't foresee it. And I can't speak with much direct experience of it, so I don't take my word for it. But I know that some of it is totally crippling. I know that some of it and some people get over it. Malcolm Gladwell did a great article for the New Yorker about the whole trauma-based approach in psychology, where he's pointing out that actually some people come through trauma better than others. Some people make use of it. Guatemala? What about Guatemala? Jeff Cheney? What about Guatemala? Oh, my fire in Guatemala. God dang, this guy knows me. Jesus. Yes, that was traumatic. And it was not, if you remember the story, a night before I had this fire in Guatemala where I burned down a fucking school that we later rebuilt, and 8 kilometers of pipe that I had gotten from UNICEF. It was a real fuck up at 20 years old or so. It was traumatic. The night before, I was listening to some Buddhist text, and it said something about adversity being the teacher of the true way, and me feeling like I confessed to my new wife, we had just gotten married, that I felt like I had not experienced enough adversity to know. So, yeah, it's related to that, and it was traumatic. I would say that so there's another thing about trauma, which is that there's what actually happens, and then there's your own sensitivity around it. And I would say I'm hypersensitive. I mean, there were times when I lost a year of productivity or was deeply damaged in my productivity because I lost a girlfriend. Now, a bunch of people would have said, good riddance or oh well or whatever and moved on. I wasn't like that. I was hypersensitive around it. It really ate at me. And I would say that that kind of adversity was a teacher of a true way. But what I want to say about the trauma encoding is if you think about it as a scale of trauma, from the little deaths we deal with every day, we missed the bus, we got to work late and got chewed out, all of those little traumas, all the way out to the macro traumas, we have to be a little more careful about that range. And then the question becomes, what do you do with that? And there is a Taoist line I like about it. The master makes use of all circumstances. I'd say the master tries to make use of all circumstances. How do you harvest your trauma and make something out of it? Is an interesting question, surely. And so that's where I would go with that. Is I'm curious about that. And lately, with some clients, I'm not dwelling on their traumas. Some of these clients are people who are very frustrated or angry at their parents, as was my firstborn child, who continues to blame me for everything that's gone wrong in his life, even though I didn't feel like I could have much direct influence on him. He didn't really respond to much of what I asked of him or encouraged him to do when he was young. Um, but I'm trying to say, okay, be that as it may, your parents, let's assume your parents were bad, that you didn't luck out that way. You got bad parents instead of good parents. The question still for getting your groove back is how are you going, what are you going to do next? What's the most you can do with what you're dealt to deal with your situation? So now notice that that's not the same as my daughter's work, which is about, you could say, a kind of desensitizing to the traumatic reaction. And so, in a way, what we're talking about here is also relate this to stage fright. Stage fright is an agitation that can make you incompetent on stage, but in small doses, or in the right dose, or when it's channeled right, it can actually make you more alert on stage. So we deal with those kinds of questions about, I want some grit, but I don't want too much grit and I don't want too little grit. I want I want to be able to manage my grit. Now, obviously, learned helplessness and all of that becomes an issue here. When someone's traumatized early in life, they don't have that many experiences yet, and so it ends up uh, looming as a larger proportion of trauma than they will deal with in the rest of their life in some situations. If you were born in a war zone, that may not be the case. You may be adapting to the amount of trauma that you will have to deal with for the rest of your short and painful life. It's so one thing I'd also bring into it is the trauma encoding story and white people's problems or wealthy people's problems. The suffering is relative. It's also unspeakable. Suffering hurts. It doesn't feel good. I guess I would also say about it that trauma is related to what really I focus on most these days, which is confidence. What do you do when your confidence is depleted? Last weekend, I went out. Was it last weekend or maybe 2 weekends ago? I went out with my buddy. Yeah, it was 2 weekends ago. My buddy, who's he's a futurist and he's pretty successful at it, though mostly as a cheerleader. He's an incredibly optimistic guy. Um, and so he's saying we've got to stop worrying and be future forward about about AI. There's nothing to worry about. The world's about to get better. We're about to go through the next great enlightenment. He goes out and he speaks for $20,000 to $40,000, which I don't get, about this stuff to other people. And I said to him, you and I are on different questions. So he's a great party animal. We go out and get stoned and we get drunk, and he always takes me someplace because he's a party kind of guy. He takes me someplace fun. And we talk at each other. I don't think he understands me that well, but he lets me talk for a while, and then he talks for a while, and then he'll ask me a question. Why? Because most of his work was successful in interviewing the luminaries of in the digerati, the Silicon Valley people. I said, you and I are working on different questions. You're dealing with, if you were in charge of the world, what would you do? I'm not interested in that. I gave that question up a while ago because I'm apparently not in charge of the world. I'm trying to figure out what's the most we could do with what we're dealt. So he said to me, and this is a darling thing about him, he said, so what are you interested in? I said, well, these days I'm paying a lot of attention to mojonomics, how we maintain our confidence, how we deal with the supply of and demand for self-confidence in ourselves and others. And I said, because I'm always trying to figure out how to motivate people around these questions. I said, has there ever been a time in your life when you felt your self-confidence depleted? When you're running on empty of self-confidence, or it had gotten dangerously low? And he said to me, no. He said, no. So apparently that valence didn't work for him, but I thought it was just amazing. There are some people who are that cheerful. I don't think he's that realistic. I tell him so. I wouldn't tell you if I didn't tell him. But that's rare. I think most of us are dealing with the trauma of being alive. And especially, this is a connection I would make, surely, the trauma of being human because we have language. I keep coming back to this. I don't like to repeat myself, but it goes without saying, but bears repeating. It's really important to my work. When you have language, you are doing something no other organism can do. You are trudging through a sandstorm of confidence eroding possibilities that no other creature can imagine. I have deep compassion for all of us. This is fucking hard work. It's harder than being a potato bug or a dog or a redwood tree. It's hard because we can imagine all of these past, present, and future threats and missed opportunities that no other creature can imagine. We are inherently a traumatized species. And we also get through language the way to cope with the trauma, which is that we can make up stories that make ourselves feel better. I can give myself pep talks. I can pretend I'm all sorts of things. I can pretend I'm a superhero. I can make believe all the way to give myself reassurance. And the more traumatized I am, either by circumstances or by my own sensitivities, the more I will be tempted to make up reassuring stories, the more I will dismantle my own, you could say, my internal bullshit detector. I'll be able to upstage my critical thinking with passion. I'll be able to tell a story the way the Trumpists do, or anybody who has found the way, has found their satisfaction in life, their confidence currency through some idea or some sense of themselves, some reflection, a shallow reflection of who they want to be, who they aspire to be. And so at a very fundamental level, I think we're all dealing with trauma because we're human. And we're dealing with extra trauma now because we are dealing in a surprisingly, unexpectedly complicated time. There was a sense that many of us had that progress was just going to continue to grow. That's also a sign of our mojonomics. That is, we tend to round towards optimistic interpretations of things. And now we're dealing with this major clusterfuck, and our confidence is shaken. And as a result, it makes us easy marks for people who say, join me and you will have unlimited confidence. It will overcome your trauma. I have a few friends who went through a trauma and then saw the light, and and it became Platonists. They become absolute purists. Um, and the way I think of them is that they fell in a hole, and their goal coming out of that hole, whatever they grabbed onto to pull themselves out of that hole, they're going to hold on to that for dear life. They never want to fucking get back in that hole again. So I can understand that. It's basically what I call what I once was lost, but now I'm blind syndrome. It's I was lost, I was traumatized. I found something that makes me feel good, it restores my confidence, it compensates for my trauma. I don't think of my trauma as anything but um, the motivation for the last epiphany I'll ever need. I have woken up. I am now solved reality, taking the red pill. That would be a very standard thing, and I think we're dealing with a lot of that. You could say we're dealing with a traumatized species. We are a traumatized species. And by the way, the more we latch onto those "I once was lost, but now I'm blind" ideas, the more trauma we cause to others. Because so yeah, once you lash onto them, you are now lashing out at anybody who disagrees with your solution to it all. Yeah, that's what I think we're entering into. So that's a long-winded and perhaps somewhat indirect response to your question. Surely, at least it comes at it from different dimensions. But in terms of trauma encoding as a term of art in psychology or in folk psychology, I don't deal with that very directly. I'm going to give you another example of one of these two people I know who went through a trauma and came out absolutist. Went, I think, all the way that direction. He was a very successful real estate developer in Santa Barbara, and we were really good friends for about 10 years. I considered him a mentor. I learned a lot of my irony from him. And then he went through a trauma that he almost dragged me into. He was subpoenaed for having given money to a Democratic cause through bad means, and he got me to donate some money to it too. And so we were both subpoenaed, but he actually ended up with a felony. And there were a few other things that went on in his life, and he locked down. I have never seen anybody locked down quite as completely as he did. And he then poured $2 million into somatic therapy for himself. 2 million, he told me. This is to deal with trauma encoding in his life. And I hadn't heard from him in years. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. He had become completely platonic. I was moving in a different direction. We totally diverged. I heard from him around Christmas last year, and there was no talking to him. There was no talking to him. He had gotten so far into the somatic therapy that when I asked him what was new in his life, he had gotten so far from introspection and the irony involved in introspection that he felt like I was attacking him just for asking what was new. Because I think he hadn't actually been looking at himself for all that time. It was all about going to fix the machine, going to decode the encoding of the trauma that he went through. Wild to see, because this guy used to be the most delightful, free-thinking, playful guy, and I would have dinner at his house with Bonnie Raitt and Michael Douglas and all these people who he was connected to down there. George Stephanopoulos. I mean, I got to meet all sorts of people from him, and now he's got no one in his life like that. He locked himself down. He declared all of his old friends, I'm sure including me, phonies. So that's a different response to trauma then. That's a serious case of I once was lost, but now I'm blind. I reached out to him over and over, trying to make the connection because he was really important to me. And I love the dude, but there was no talking to him. He had just locked down. Okay. Well, I haven't gotten a whole lot of comments here. So let me see what I'm going to do with these last few minutes here. Let's see. I had a big hit this week by going back to the old saw. I made a video like the ones that did well a couple of months ago, a couple of years ago. So I was getting like 150,000 views on some of my videos, which is rare. And then it went down to maybe 100 or 200 on my long form videos. And then I went back and did one, how to roll trolls and stump Trumpists. um, that suddenly got 10,000, which is great. And I'm glad for what audience I get. I try to get more. I try to figure out hooks that make my work relevant, but at the same time, I recognize that this isn't necessarily where most people want to go, for the reasons I described earlier, which is that it's more fun to shop among ideas. It's more fun to play with these unexplained explanations. It's easier. And the curiosity I'm trying to evoke is it feels unfamiliar, it feels uncertain and doubtful. But what I'm saying is, if you actually set a standard for how you're going to decide which theory is more realistic than which, and you do it based on not allowing yourself these unexplained explanations. You have to start somewhere. You have to start with some unexplained explanations. I'm not going to explain the origins of life from quantum theory and Big Bang. That's another generation's, they'll deal with that one. But in the meantime, I'm starting basically with the second law of thermodynamics, that every organized system falls apart. And that you also have, when it falls apart, there's energy release. When you've got segregated hot coffee and milk and you put them together, the process of them equalizing is actually work to heat up the milk. So when you put a frozen pizza into an oven, a hot box, let's say, they're equalizing. It's not energy, but it's just the equalization. It's the second law of thermodynamics. So I start from that, and I have to explain everything, including Donald Trump, from that, and I don't get to employ any um, uh, unexplained explanations. These naming is not explaining. I have to explain, and I don't get to use any false moves where I abandon the physical for some abstract concept. That's the work I've taken on, and I apply it to figuring out what's up with assholes, but also what's up with me, because I am narcissish. I am sadonarsistic. Oh, the word will come to me in time. That is, like everybody, this is me included movement work. This is all the universal Me Too movement. Me Too about everyone. I track what people want to do, where they tend to go with my ideas and other ideas. I'm certainly reading seeing a lot of TikTok and all of that. And one thing that's on my mind is the amount of what I'll call virtue bragging. It's kind of like virtue signaling and humble bragging, but it's that confidence juice that you hear in most people's approach to this, to big questions like Trump. I got a nice one today. I got a nice comment from someone this morning who said, yeah, I really want to join your study group because what I'm doing isn't working. I'm not succeeding at getting anywhere with Trump supporters, is what he said. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to cultivate, because I'm not getting anywhere with them either. I'm trying lots of things, and I know that you're not going to get. Their whole goal is for you to not get anywhere. That's what absolutism means. Is that nothing can influence you. That's what absolute actually means. You've absolved yourself permanently. You're perma-affirmed. So you're permanently affirmed, and you're absolved, and you can do no wrong, and no one can influence you. That kind of stuff. So that there are people who are curious, who can admit to themselves, what I'm doing isn't working well enough. I think I'm delighted when I see that, and I wouldn't assume that I would get a lot of that. The majority of my comments are people who say, well, this is the obvious thing to do. This is what I always do, and it always works, or something like that. I mean, some of them are kind of amazing. Whenever I write about how to roll trolls and some Trumpists, I hear from people who say, I don't even talk to them. They're beneath me. I won't even talk to them. Notice how that is a kind of a virtue bragging. I'm too pure for them. Their egotism is beneath me. And they don't even seem to notice. They kind of say, what good does it do to try to engage with these people? Well, what good does it do to not try to engage with them? Look where we are. This country is. I mean, we got nails in the coffin here from people saying I wouldn't want to engage with them. I understand how you'd say I'm too shy to. I don't know the means to. I don't have the ways to. That's all. That's all fine. That's actually where I am. But if you're saying, yeah, no, it's beneath me, I don't need to do that, or I just say this and get some glory out of saying it, I feel good about myself. I feel like I won. That's the thing that they're doing. The Trumpists who write to me, they're claiming victory for having said something that basically amounts to you're a poopy butt. I mean, it's really amazing. So no, I can see why I'm not that popular. In the meantime, this one that I did put out is the closest to a recipe I've ever delivered, and it's an assertive one. I am thinking that in this Trump era, what we need to do, it's so fundamental. They don't have a moral leg to stand on. They don't even have stumps to crawl on. They have chewed through all potential claims that they walk their talk. This is clearly, when we do it, it's glorious. When you do it, it's evil. Do exactly the same thing. That's all they're doing. They don't have a moral leg to stand on. And I can't then shame them for their immorality because they're shameless. That's the point with them. But what I can do is just laugh at them, snicker while they're talking, and keep my ground that way. Does it work? No. Does it change their mind? No. Does it engage the backfire effect? Yes, it does. But then I'm remembering what an incredible challenge this is to try to figure out what would actually work on people who have gone absolutist. And I'm thinking that in this era, we need to be doing more of that. You don't need facts. You don't need moral arguments. This is the liberation we need, because a lot of people feel when they watch someone like Dean Withers, like, well, it's fun to watch and I feel heroic because I'm on Dean's side and I agree with him, but I don't have all those facts. So when I'm dealing with my aunt, I wouldn't risk it, because what if she calls me up on something, some fact, she's got some talking point I don't know enough about? I'm saying, no, you're free from that. You don't have to worry about that. They don't care at all about the things they pretend to care about so much that it trumps all other considerations. You just need to focus on that. Laugh at that. Point out over and over that they will say and do anything to avoid admitting that they're wrong, that they're actually wusses, that they're uh, pusillanimous Puritans was the term I came up with yesterday for it. But I wouldn't use that on them because I don't want grandstand words. I don't want to use fancy words that make me feel glorious. I'm trying to figure out how to disappoint them in their campaign to come away feeling like they've solved reality and that they always win. That's where their confidence comes from. Their confidence doesn't come from understanding politics or caring about politics or caring about morality. It comes from feeling like they can always claim victory. That it's so obvious in them. So there's and with some clients who are dealing with this kind of thing, I say, prime yourself. When they start talking, chuckle to yourself. Chuckle out loud. It orients you towards a calmer place where you know where you stand with respect to these people. You're not going to try to change their mind. You're not going to try to overwhelm them with facts. You're not going to try to shame them into morality. You're just going to fucking laugh at these guys out there who are definitely just jerking off in public. That's all they're doing. So is that always a strategy? No, but it's a strategy I'm leaning into more and more. I was a little concerned about it at first because it's the easiest for me to do. And I don't want to do what's easy. I want to do what's strategically useful. But I'm also saying that despite the fact that I like it, I think that's the better choice these days, because not interacting with them is not helping, and accommodating them is not helping. Give an inch and they'll take a mile. And moralizing isn't working. So and facts are not working, because none of that is what's going on. There is really only one thing going on. They're not playing three-dimensional chess at all. They're playing one-dimensional chess. They're up, you're down. It's sadonarcissism taken to the absolute. I'm sadonarsisish. I'll get it yet. Narcissish. I'm sadonarsisish. You are too, I bet. I don't want to insult you and get the backfire effect going, but that's my sense. Humans are sadonarsisish. We would have to be because language makes us an incredibly trauma encoded species. All right. All right. We're getting close to the end here. I got 10 minutes more. Someone say, Jeremy, you ignorant slut, and then put me right. Someone here, just say something that that's been on your mind this week. Someone type in something here because I'm long-winded and I've used a lot of wind here. I hope you found something in it. Let's see here. I find that offhand innocuous question in passing can force them to think about something in a new light. The process can take a while, though. Good. This is a new one that's up for me since I wrote that article. See, I'm not satisfied. I got to keep on coming up with. So an innocuous question. Can you give me an example, Nebulous Void? By the way, nice to have you here. I think I recognize your name from the comments section. Give me an example of an innocuous question. I have seen this written up as a useful strategy, and I think it's a good one. Innocuous, non sequitur. One thing that I've considered as part of the ironic mocking is to come up with a fake but newsworthy sounding thing. Have you heard about the new the Philomonia gate? Philomonia gate? I just made up the word. Gate. You haven't heard about it? Are you paying any attention to the news at all? How could you have missed that? Totally bogus. But that's a way to throw them off also. But to do it, and not just like, haha, gotcha, but just like, yeah, I'm just doing what you're doing. You know, whatever you do unto me is fair game for me to do unto you. You're making up stuff. You got all sorts of stories going on. So something like that. Okay, so when you say yes, do you mean that that's the kind of thing you're talking about? Is a non sequitur like that? The other possibility is you ask them a question that is really innocuous. It's very important to be able to change subjects on them. The fundamental thing that they're doing, I've described many fundamentals, but I think they all converge, is frame dominance. Also been thinking about this lately. So frame dominance is simply that they win not based on content, they win based on getting you to talk about what they want to talk about. Why do they want to talk about it? Because they can win with you there. So what we call whataboutism, which is, I think, a terrible name for it, is this kind of frame shifting. So they are just searching for frames by which to dominate you in the conversation. And so changing the subject is a way of avoiding that frame dominance. And it's also why they say things to provoke. It's also why we end up having all of this clickbait. I'm looking for a word for this, what it is that you want to put people on the defensive. If you want someone who is going to, if you want someone to follow your lead, poke them, and then they'll get defensive. I saw a comedian who played anti-abortionist by pointing out that they must love gay people. Yes, he's great. His last name is Cash or something like that. Yeah, so this is the other thing you do. I call this clone to own. You take their argument and you run with it to the extremes, and you act more earnest than they are. So this has been effective. So we have to keep in mind about this. It's almost impossible to tell what's effective. For example, it would be interesting if those people who show up for Dean Withers competitions, where he trumps them in his cleaner version of the Charlie Kirk kind of format, whether any of them end up changing their mind is that's eyes on the prize. What I'm trying to do here, we got no guardrails left, or hardly any guardrails in the government. The only thing left is public opinion. I track the polls hourly almost. He was down to 15 for a couple of days, 15 negative, and now he's up to 13.5 this morning in the average of polls. I'm watching because I think what we've got to do is move a margin of people into recognizing that that this dog don't hunt. And there are people moving that way, but we need to do it's our civic duty to engage with these people and confront them somewhat. But the thing we're talking about here, the comedian who takes their argument and runs with it about Muhammad love gay people because they have so few abortions. Um, uh, if you do it right on the edge, which is where I'm playing MAGA Mike, Magnificent Mike is always I'm trying to play right on the edge where people can't tell whether I'm serious or not. That throws them off. You're giving them what in their heart of hearts they want. If you say, I totally agree with you, you've changed my mind, you woke me up, that's the orgasm they want. They don't care if they get it because they claim victory either way. If you don't get it, you're stupid. Cliff Cash, there we go, from Ohio. That's the one. Yes. Aren't high gold prices an indication of serious economic trouble? Okay, so you call that an innocuous question. I'm not sure that quite. I'm not sure I would try that one. For one thing, I don't understand macroeconomics enough to say that it's a clear indication of serious economic trouble. I don't want to get into a debate with them about that. So I'm more likely to want to try something that's that's got no traction related to their frame, because they can come up with something, and I say, and they, one thing they come up with, they can always tap out by saying, I don't know about that. Yeah, Mike Huckabee did this yesterday with Tucker Carlson. I thought it was fascinating, and Tucker called him on it. Um, but he said, "Well, no, I haven't been following the Epstein stuff." And then he had an opinion about the Epstein stuff, and Tucker Carlson said, "So you're really saying you don't follow this stuff?" But they will tap out by saying, because they have a move they can use that's slippery on every side of the. There are 4 qualities that God has, and they're playing God. And with each one of these 4 qualities, they have a way to toggle so that they're always right. So I know everything. They're a know-it-all. They're omniscient. And anything I don't know is not worth knowing. See how they can toggle that? Take omnipotence, all-powerful. I am the King of Kings, and if I ever lose, it's because I'm the poor martyred victim. This is totally Jesus Christ. It's built right in. So you got to have a way to win no matter how things go. If the whole point of this is to maintain your absolute addiction to maximizing your self-confidence, you need a way to call every win for your opponent a win for you. It's heads I win, tails you lose, and if you don't like that, it's tails I win, heads you lose. That's the game they're playing. So you got those 2. I know everything, and everything I don't know doesn't count, or we can't talk about it. It's not relevant. I am all powerful, and everything, and if I ever lose, it's because someone was mean and I'm the victim. On omnificence, which is all good, I am all good. Johnson, not Huckabee. I know this was a Mike Huckabee. I recognize the beard, but Johnson as well. I wouldn't be surprised. And Tucker's a piece of shit, but I still track all this stuff. And these days I'm reading. You know who I'm liking a lot is Scaramucci. I really enjoy and learn from him. I think he's an interesting kind of wise from a different angle from me. I am finding him useful these days. That show he's got with that woman, I find useful. Let me get to omnificence. Omnificence is I'm all good. Everything I do is good, and if I do something bad, it's for a good, larger cause. So the heart of omnificence, I am eternally perfectly good, is no deed too dirty for a saint like me. You can always justify by saying, well, no, we have a bigger vision and you don't understand it, but we have to break eggs to make this omelet. Or as I wrote it up to, this week on YouTube, on Facebook, if you want to make an omelet, you have to start global nuclear war. I mean, take that one to the extreme. And then the 4th quality doesn't get an omni name. It's just his oneness. God is one. God never contradicts himself. So for this one, you'd have to say, I am not a hypocrite. I'm never a hypocrite. and you have to be completely consistent in your claim that you're never a hypocrite, and then you can be as much of a hypocrite as you want. So this one would manifest in, I am completely consistent, and if I don't look consistent, it's your eyes, not me. I'm being consistent. You don't understand what I'm saying. No, it all holds together. I've got a coherent theory, something like that. Okay. All right. So closing out, let me just say tomorrow I am doing it. I'm going to say 11 o'clock because I have to, no, I am losing out on Terry walks these days because I have to get back early for these. I'm going to say this here. I don't know how to do this. I'm going to say 12 o'clock tomorrow. I'm going to be here, Google Meet, at 12 o'clock tomorrow. This is Pacific Standard Time, PST. If anyone wants to join me and have this kind of conversation, but without me just talking, it's a conversation in Google Meet where everybody gets to talk and we play with ideas that are coming from you guys. This is really an opportunity to play with your ideas. For example, one guy, Rob, who I don't know if he's here today, I'll have to tell him we're meeting at noon tomorrow, said, I want to talk about this week. What is the story about people who leave cults? What do they tend to do? Fascinating question. I've read some great books about it. I'll give you an example of one that's called Dancing Bears. Half of the book is about what happens when they de-domesticated when it became illegal to have dancing bears in the circus in Russia, what happened to those bears when they were sent out in the wild. And the other half of the book is what happened to Soviet party members and people who lived under the Soviet Union after the Soviet Union broke up. How people deal with it is a fascination. I'm guessing we'll get to that question tomorrow since Rob brought it up, and we'll get to any questions you want. I am just delighted that you would give me this opportunity to share the things that I'm enthusiastic about and that you find them interesting enough to stick around. I love that. I am grateful to you all. And I'll be back again next week. All right. See you guys.